right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kelly Herbert. I'm acting executive director for SPEER. We really appreciate you spending the morning with us, and we are very excited for this presentation. In an essence of time, I will go ahead and kick it off to Noah Oakes, our state and local policy manager. Noah.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you everyone for being here. I'd like to welcome you to our second part of a 2-week webinar series we have. Today is going to be on nuts and bolts of Texas energy efficiency rules, and I'm going to be presenting for a portion of this, and then I will kick it over to Alison for kind of some of her considerations and some things that she's ready to present on. So I'd like to first start with, there we go. A little bit about SPEER. We are one of 6 regional energy efficiency organizations in the country. Our organization is in both Oklahoma and Texas, and our program work is in policy, building codes, high performance buildings, and local governments. And our membership includes everyone from advocacy organizations to cities, energy service companies, manufacturers, trade associations, and utilities. A few quick announcements. Today we are offering CEUs, so if you are hoping to earn some CEU credits, you will need to fill out the survey that will be sent out later this afternoon, hopefully, to earn those. If you have called in on a phone line, and all we can see on the attendees list is your number, please send me an email directly with your name and number and let me know that you're trying to get those credits, and that way we can get that squared away for you. We also have a couple upcoming events I wanted to bring to your attention. First, next week on March 2nd through the 4th, we have the Texas Energy Summit convening here in Austin, Texas at the Texas Capitol. There's a lot of really great breakout sessions and discussions that are going to be had there. I encourage all the attendees to check out the website and register if you haven't already done so. Also, on April 11th through the 14th, the Energy Thought Summit is being presented or hosted by Z Prime, of which SPEER is both a host, and we'll have a couple panels there, I believe, as well. So we're very excited about that, but just something to keep on your radar for the next few months. Lastly, a few just housekeeping items. As I mentioned earlier, the feedback survey is not just for those of you who would like to get CEU credits. It's also beneficial if everyone can fill that out, just so we can make sure that we're providing you beneficial information and content over our webinar series and make sure we're getting what you guys need as attendees and as stakeholders. And then lastly, as many of you know, since we've been doing this for many years now, or almost 4 years now, 3 years, we'll be using the chat box function for most of the discussion. Please feel free to put comments or questions in there until the last 10 minutes or so of the program, at which point we'll switch over to the hand raise function for a little bit of Q&A, or if you'd like, you're welcome to put your questions still in there, and we'll try to address them at that point. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speakers. I'm, of course, one of them, as I just mentioned. I've been with SPEER since November of last year in this current role. Before that, I worked with the Texas Department of Transportation in their commission support section as a policy analyst for just over 3 years. I also attended the LBJ School of Public Affairs to earn my master's degree in public affairs. And while I was there, I worked as a research assistant with the Center for Transportation Research, as well as with the Nature Conservancy during the 85th regular and special sessions as our legislative intern. I'd also like to introduce Alison Silverstein. Alison is an independent consultant, strategist, and researcher on electric system reliability, resilience, market design, transmission, energy efficiency, and technology adoption issues. Her work on major federal electricity efforts includes the US DOE's staff report on electric markets and reliability, 3 national transmission congestion studies, the Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative Framework, and the industry-wide advancement of synchrophaser technology. Alison has advised several states, utilities, ISOs, and non-governmental entities since 2004. She was a senior advisor to Chairman Pat Wood at FERC from 2001 to 2004, and she co-chaired the 2003 US-Canada blackout investigation at the Public Utility Commission. She was at the Public Utility Commission of Texas from 1995 to 2001, and she previously worked with PG&E as a consultant in Washington, D.C., and she serves on the boards of the American Council for Energy Efficient Economy and the Health Alliance for Austin Musicians. Alison, I'm so happy to have you here, and thank you for agreeing to participate. So to begin with in our presentation, I'm going to go over kind of a historical context and overview of the energy efficiency rules here in Texas, both from the legislative as well as the implementation at the regulatory state agency side of things. And then I'll break down a little bit more into what's in the current rule and what the performance looks like out of those requirements and those rules that we have now. So to start with, back in 1999, Texas was actually the first state in the country to establish an energy efficiency resource standard in the country. And at that time, it was 10% reduction in demand growth, which was supposed to be implemented by January 1st, 2004. The Public Utility Commission, as their purview to implement this legislation, set an interim goal of 5% to be completed by 2003, January 1st, 2003, and then would ramp it up to meet statutory compliance to 10% by 2004. A few years later, as we see in 2005, the Texas legislature came back and amended the statute by requiring utilities to offer options for reduced energy consumption, peak demand, or energy costs. They put some standards and requirements on the standard offer program, making sure that it's neutral to technology and equipment and fuel source. They also require the commission to adopt market transformation programs such as energy smart schools, appliance retirement, recycling, and AC tune-up, more holistic approaches as it relates to these demand side solutions. They allowed a 10% cap on commission approved funding for energy efficiency programs to be performed for research and development. That is a cap, it's not a mandate, but it's just something that's still in the rule today in order to allow utilities to kind of continue seeking out new and advanced ways to utilize energy efficiency in their programming. And lastly, and certainly not least, and it's still in the statute and the regulations today and the rules today, is adding a section on low income energy programs. They put a minimum criteria of 10% of the funding has to go towards low income programs. And like I said, that's still in our rule today. But as is the Texas legislature's way, 2 years later, they reconvened and they wanted to increase the EERS to 20% demand growth and have that implemented by 2009. Now, this particular legislation, which was HB 3693 that came out in 2007, has a lot of really interesting provisions that we still see today, and some things that are really interesting, even though they're not still there. One of which is the Public Utility Commission's study on full potential of energy efficiency. This study was completed in 2008, and it was the last potential study for energy efficiency that was commissioned by the Public Utility Commission. So we've gone almost 15 years without a second follow-up full potential study from the commission. They also allowed additional program options for the standard offer programs and the market transformation programs. This is particularly interesting because in addition to things like energy monitoring equipment and solar thermal and solar electric programs, they also included demand response programs within the energy efficiency rule at this time. And that becomes kind of interesting when we start looking forward to some of the output and the performance we're seeing. Around this time, we start seeing a little bit higher achievements, and there's definitely a complementary nature to those types of programs with energy efficiency. Another provision allowed utilities to earn their bonuses and exceeding their goals, as well as establishing the cost recovery factor. I'll get into that a little bit, but generally speaking, these were not intended to cover all the costs with energy efficiency spending by utilities, but just to help definitely ease some of the burden that they would incur based on implementing these energy efficiency programs, which will fundamentally reduce demand and reduce their revenues over time. Another big piece is the large industrial customer exemption that was applied. At this time, there were many arguments that the large industrial customers came to the table with, but one of which was that it's in their best interest as competitors to always be looking to lower their overhead costs. And as a result, they would always be looking to invest in things that will do that, such as energy efficiency programs. And obviously the legislature agreed and put that into statute that they wanted to have that exemption. So now our energy efficiency rules only have residential and commercial customers included at this time. And the last bullet point here is that they added a municipally owned utilities section as well, which kind of mirrors a lot of the requirements that we see in the other things that have already been placed. Fast forwarding a little bit to 2010, this is an interesting time where it's the first time that we see the Public Utility Commission acting without legislative mandate to increase their demand reduction goals from 20% to 30% by 2013. So we see now that the PUC has the ability and the latitude to change some of these rules if they see so fit. And a year later, the legislature, seemingly in some ways agreeing with that 30% increase, also put in a trigger mechanism based on some of the economic situation and scenarios that we saw at that time to say if and when a utility's 30% of demand growth was equal to 0.4% of the peak weather-adjusted summer peak demand for residential and commercial loads, then a new rule or the new goal would be 0.4%. So we kind of see that trigger mechanism that's in place from 2011. A couple other provisions from 2011 saw they expanded demand side programs to add things like variable speed AC systems, data center efficiency programs, and behavioral changes to be added to that demand side management program group. And they also added an energy efficiency plan annual report, which is due by April 1st of every year from each utility. And then the last thing we see in the historical overview is 2019. the Public Utility Commission opened up their rules again, and this time it was a little more administrative cleanup than anything else. It wasn't substantive, but it changed moved the energy efficiency cost recovery factor and the performance bonus into its own section, which would be 25-182 instead of 181. So I know I just went over 20 years plus of history pretty quickly. So where does that leave us now? Well, as I mentioned, there are three sections of the chapter. The first section is chapter 25-181, which focuses on just the energy efficiency goals. And what we're seeing out of this is that first and foremost, the programs must be cost effective in nature. So in other words, the cost of the program has to be less than or equal to the benefits of the program. And those program costs include everything from cost incentives, evaluating, monitoring, and verification contractor costs, actual or allocated research and demand cost, and administrative costs, which I'll get into some of those different differences here in a moment. As mentioned, we do have that new rule, which is that trigger mechanism, which is 30% of annual demand growth, a reduction of annual demand growth, residential and commercial customers. And once that's equal to 0.4% of summer adjusted peak demand, the new goal is 0.4%. The rule also talks a little bit about what incentive payments are to energy efficiency service providers, third-party contractors, and end users, and kind of how to incentivize those programs from different perspectives, kind of moving down the line. It also talked about, as I said, utility administration costs and put some caps on those. So utility costs are similar. They are things like informational activities or educational outreach, reviewing programs, reporting, different factors like that. And those total costs cannot exceed 15% of the utility's total program costs. That is also coupled with the research and demand costs that I mentioned earlier, which is capped at 10%. And you have to put those together for a cumulative 20% total for program costs between the two utility costs and research and demand costs. And I apologize, I know there's a lot of different percentages throwing around there, so I'll try to be as clear as I can. And all these rules are actually publicly available as well. And the last portion of this slide talks about just some of the requirements for the standard offer programs, the market transformation programs, and the self-delivered programs. So for instance, as I mentioned before, the standard offer programs have to be neutral with respect to technology and equipment or fuels. Market transformation programs, since they are a little bit more holistic and address a lot bigger, in some instances, demand response and demand reduction. They have to identify their goals, their barriers to entry, their key strategies, their baseline studies, the various metrics and things to ensure that they're being evaluated and monitored for compliance. The second set here on chapter 25-181 talks a lot more about the reporting side of things. So as I mentioned, the energy efficiency plans and reports, which are due on April 1st, those are delivered by each utility, and they provide information on how each utility wants to achieve their goals for demand and energy reduction. They want to show, and savings for that matter. They also describe the different customer classes they work at. They provide historical overviews of what the budgets looked like and what the expenditures was for the previous 5 years as well. We see inspection and measurement and verification protocols are established. We also see that third-party monitoring from an evaluating, monitoring, and verification contractor is required in order to make sure that the programs are being verified consistently, accurately, and ethically, and measured as such as well. And actually, we use some of the information from the 2020 report from the EMV group, Tetra Tech, here in just a few slides. As I mentioned before, the targeted low-income energy efficiency program is still included. It's that 10% minimum of the energy efficiency program funding. And they also have opened up an energy efficiency implementation project, which works as kind of a forum for developing best practices for stakeholders and groups to get together, as well as working with the PUC staff and commission to hash out some of the issues as relates to energy efficiency programming. The last couple here just talk about retail providers and areas of choice, where the reps are able to conduct a little bit of outreach and information programs. It also talks about the customer protections, identification notices, and potential administrative penalties if needed from the commission. Chapter 25-182 is, as I mentioned, the energy efficiency cost recovery factor and the performance bonuses. The cost recovery factor specifically is calculated on a utility's forecasted annual energy efficiency program expenditures, their preceding years over or under recovery, including their interest in municipal and utility cost recovery factor preceding expenses, bonuses earned, EM&V contractor costs for the preceding year. So all that's kind of pulled into one base rate. And as I said before, it's not intended to recover all the cost of energy efficiency, but it is there to kind of help out a little bit with some of those lost revenues that we've seen. The energy efficiency performance bonus is intended to be an incentive for utilities to go beyond their exceeded demand and energy reduction goals. And if so, they will earn a share of the net benefits that go beyond those exceeded goals. And those are going to be capped at 1% of the net benefits for every 2% of the demand reduction that they've exceeded. And there's a max of total benefits of 10% that they can earn in that performance bonus. And then this last bullet point here is just the chapter 25-183, which talks a little bit more, goes into detail on the reporting and the evaluation of the different energy efficiency programs. And I really, I think there's just a lot of more administrative work in that as well, just kind of look through and see what they're looking at. So as I was kind of putting them all together, I started asking myself, and as I think many of you do, we want to know how effective these programs are. Well, if we look back to 2003 all the way up to 2020, that dark blue line are our goals for energy efficiency, and the light blue are what we've achieved. And as you can see, we've achieved our goals every year. And as I mentioned earlier, once we get to about 2008, 2009, once demand response becomes included, we do see a significant growth in our achievement compared to the growth in our goals. So while it's not necessarily 100% because of demand response and load management programs, there's definitely a correlation there to show that these are complementary and they are very helpful for utilities. But also they're part of the puzzle. They're definitely a piece of the pie here, so to speak, to address energy efficiency and reduce our total demand as a state. And that particularly is shown here in our standard offer programs and our market transformation programs. As you can see, load management for the standard offer and demand response for the standard offer take up a large piece of the pie. And over on the right side, similarly, we do see residential demand response, and we see load management still a large chunk together of this particular pie chart. My last question as I was putting these together is really just making sure that, are these programs cost beneficial? And the reality is they are. We see over year after year, they are positive cost benefit ratios. We see that as recently as 2020, the ratio was actually 4.0, which was seemingly significantly higher than the previous 2.2, 2.3, 2.7 years. So we're seeing a good cost benefit analysis here to show that we are actually doing what we need to do. But the real question after I've given you all this history and I'll talk about that, is why are we talking about these regulations at 10:30 in the morning? Well, we know that over the last few months, the Public Utility Commission has signaled that they intend to talk about and open up the energy efficiency rule. First, they talked about it in their phase 1 design, which talked about demand response items setting higher performance standards for energy efficiency. We know the commissioners have made public statements at public meetings, as well as most recently, Chairman Peter Lake mentioned last week in an interview with Evan Smith in the Texas Tribune that he wanted to also look into opening up these rules, because it's been over 10 years since the last time we've actually seen substantive changes to the goals and the requirements. And so if any of you tuned in last week to our demand side discussion, there's a lot of talk from one of our panelists that talked about this is the time to really get shareholder input and to bring in and start this conversation so that we can really come out with a robust set of considerations for what an energy efficiency rule could look like and what those expectations could be among stakeholders. And that's exactly why we've asked Alison Silverstein to be here today. Just a few weeks ago, she filed a scoping document with the Public Utility Commission with the EEIP project. And as a result, I think it was a really comprehensive look at some different considerations, and it's a great start to really look into what we can look at as these rules start to come together and what we can discuss as a group of stakeholders moving forward. So Alison, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you, and thank you both so much for inviting me. Let me figure out if I can get my PowerPoint on. Zoom has reset on me. Noah, can you put mine up?
I can put yours up. Give me 1 second.
Thank you. This always happens. Zoom resets on its own without anyone being warned about it.
All righty, let me go to presenter mode here.
There we go. Thank you. So as Noah said, I have been thinking about what I've spent a career working on electric system reliability and also on clean energy and energy efficiency. And one of the things I've experienced as a regulator and as a participant in regulatory activities is that if you let people, there's too much bias and anchoring to where are we today, and not enough thinking about what does success look like, where do we want to be in 10 years, where do we want to be in 5 years. So I thought, what if we were to start fresh, shake the etch a sketch, as my old boss would say, and look at if we were going to reinvent an energy efficiency rule for Texas, what would a modern energy efficiency rule that is not based on old assumptions and biases or programs look like? And to be super clear, we set up the original Texas market and all of the programs specifically to minimize costs. And we took reliability for granted, and we worked within it. So all the rules that we have set up today are 20, 30, 40 years old in terms of their assumptions and biases and processes, even though Texas was the first state to adopt an energy efficiency portfolio standard, which was novel at the time. And the way we set up our programs was novel. And a lot of that was a reaction to how California and other advanced states were doing it in terms of administrative burden. So parts of what we have today, I would like to keep, and parts of what we have, I want to throw out completely and rethink. So this presentation and the material that I filed at the commission a few weeks ago is specifically oriented to, thank you for advancing that, specifically oriented to where I think we could be in 10, 20 years, where we should be today and why, rather than, and I'm trying to be completely untethered from most of the existing program. These are my views only. So this is not SPEER's fault. They're none of my clients. This isn't their fault either. So this is what I think as somebody who's been around the block a few times and looking at where we want to be when we grow up. Next, please. We need updated policies and rules, and these are the reasons why. Texas population and energy demand is going crazy. And we know we have demonstrably high levels of energy waste because our current energy efficiency is too small and because too many Texans are dying in uninsulated homes. And we know that we have high ongoing levels of energy, economic and social inequity, and extraordinarily high energy burdens. And those can be fixed by energy efficiency. We have huge power system operational reliability and resource adequacy challenges that are not, frankly, effectively understood by the people who are running our grid or regulating it. And those are due to changing supply side resource mix and the rise in changes in electricity demand. We cannot build our way out of this. And so we have to come up with other solutions. We certainly can't build our way out of it at low cost, using supply side measures alone. And in fact, if you're bored, I just filed something yesterday at the Public Utility Commission that is a petition for the Public Utility Commission to direct ERCOT to share to publicize and document all of the costs that have been spent to date on all of the changes in reliability undertakings. So that means the Public Utility Commission's, the impacts of the change in price cap and the change in ORDC, the impacts of all of ERCOT's more conservative operational posture, and what that means for reliability unit commitment costs, which are very, very high, ancillary service costs, which are very, very high, energy prices, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we Texans deserve to see. And also all of the costs of impacts of securitization, both on the electricity and the gas side from URI, because those are costs that we will be paying in bills that will not do anything to improve reliability. They're just sunk costs that are going to come out of our wallets. And so those are a cost burden that is going to make energy and energy burdens even more expensive for us and make it even more complicated. Some of us, many of us, would like to decarbonize the power system. I don't see that as a formal Texas policy goal. So we don't talk about that much when we're at the PUC, but it's there. One of the things I've learned since I moved to Texas 25 plus years ago is you can never go wrong catering to Texas jingoism and Texans' pride of self. And so it is very clear that Texas efficiency goals and accomplishments are shamefully low compared to other states and compared to our potential to do better. And last and very important, we have a very meaningful target on the efficiency side or on the supply side to aim against. And that is the Berkshire Hathaway proposal and Starwood alternative to charge ERCOT a mere $8 billion plus fuel and operating costs to build backup natural gas plants that they promise will never be put into the market, but will only be used in the event of a grid emergency like the next Uri. That's really sweet of them. And what it says to me is if our legislators or our regulators are suckers enough to think that we could spend $8 billion on natural gas plants, maybe we've got $8 billion to see what we could do for energy efficiency, which wouldn't just operate during a grid emergency. Energy efficiency and demand response would kind of be operating 24/7, 365. So next slide, please. So here are my thoughts about what some of the elements that should be in a modern Texas energy efficiency rule. Massive amounts of energy efficiency and DR that need to be targeted, not at old school, let's save kilowatt hours, which is how all of the original energy efficiency programs were designed and are still being rewarded primarily. But rather, we need to be targeting summer and winter peak reduction, not just here in Texas summer peak. And our programs need to be designed tomorrow to deliver at least 1,000 megawatts of summer and 1,000 megawatts of winter peak reduction each year. They also need to be putting in programs that reduce ramping needs so that we can balance intermittent resource, the growth in intermittent resources and the common occurrence of losing a major thermal plant or a nuclear plant or a transmission line, so that we can use all of these resources to both reduce the high level of load that we need to meet and reduce the ramping needs that the supply side puts on our system. And we should be spending at least $800 million a year or more on energy efficiency. We should be changing the formal program goal to peak megawatts, not 2% of load growth or of energy or of demand as an absolute. We should be prioritizing programs, again, that address peaks and address megawatts so that energy savings are gravy. They're not the point itself for this time, because the more and more solar and wind we get, energy costs are already demonstrably driven so high that we don't need to be saving as many kilowatt hours. I will grant you that every time natural gas prices go up, energy savings are not merely gravy, they are valuable in and of themselves, but it is certain that measures that we undertake to reduce summer and winter peak will in and of themselves deliver huge amounts of energy savings as well. But we need to be targeting for the peak reduction and reliability improvement impacts, and then counting the energy savings and tweak that later. For specific technologies and programs, I recommend that we start with the list from the ACEEE study that I've included in the list of references, and I hope many of you have seen. We brought ACEEE in to do a study for Texas with the specific goal of—
Sorry, could you say that?
Sorry, my watch decided to start talking. We asked ACEEE to say if we actually cared in Texas about reducing peak quickly using efficiency and demand response, how much could we get in 5 years, targeting both summer and winter peak? They did a nice little analysis on that. It is on the PUC website and on the ACEEE website and in my list of references here. And that list starts with high quality heat pumps to replace electric resistance heating in old HVAC systems, dispatchable thermostats, weatherization, etc. We need to significantly reduce the menu of acceptable energy efficiency options for the short term, for the capacity short period, to maximize our focus and maximize our ability to deliver cost-effective efficiency at scale. What that means is focus. Do a few things much better and bigger. Don't leave the opportunity to do a whole lot of things on the side that don't materially move us toward the goal. That means, for instance, no more commercial lighting programs, because we have the federal government doing that through lighting standards. No more cheap educational promos, minimal amounts of custom tailored commercial and industrial programs. When you look at ERCOT peak, both summer and winter, 40 to 50% of our peak load increases of our total peak loads in summer and winter are driven by residential and small commercial. What that says is, if we want to be fixing peak, we shouldn't be spending a whole lot of money on deeply tailored programs serving a very small number of customers. We should be doing it on highly replicable stuff like weatherization that is touching as many Texans as possible and saving as many Texans as possible wallets and lives. We should be prioritizing small residential and commercial customers. Maybe I mean to read residential and small commercial customers. And we should be spending a minimum of 30 to 40% of our program cost on low income and multifamily projects, including weatherization and appliance replacement, because those are the people, for equity reasons and for public health reasons, are being harmed the most by this problem. Next, please. What else should be in a rule? One of the big questions is how much to and how to include load management, demand response, and aggregated behind the meter resources into an energy efficiency rule, and how to integrate those resources into actual system operation. I don't know all those answers. That's why I'm not the person writing the rules. But my general thought is, yes, we should particularly be enabling demand response delivery for residential and commercial customers. We should be requiring every single rep to bring a minimum amount of verifiable demand response peak reduction capability every year. If it were me, I would start this at 5% requirement for every rep and ramp it up. We should be giving reps and TDUs a bonus for bringing dispatchable, verifiable, fast ramp capability to grid operations, not just peak reduction capability. And we should be re-examining the role of TDUs relative to reps and ERCOT in dispatching and leveraging load management and DR and DER resources. The reason is that there's a lot of other valuable things out on the grid for operational reliability that TDUs could be using demand response resources for, like local voltage management, decongesting parts of the transmission system in order to better use low-cost wind and solar, or to route around particular grid obstacles. So we should be thinking about rethinking particularly the TDU operational capabilities to solve grid needs that aren't the entire bulk power system. And if that means revisiting the relationship between TDUs and storage, I encourage that as well. Do we keep the existing TDU managed procurement model? Yes. With the light EM&V model? Yes. It works for a retail competition system. It doesn't cost a lot compared to other states' much heavier administrative processes. Clearly, we need to change the TDU bonus system. I don't know anyone outside the TDU offices who are happy with it. And it is not working as a way to incent major energy efficiency reductions or major either energy or peak reductions. If it's so easy for them to earn that much money, maybe we're making it incenting the wrong stuff. Next, please. And for those of you on this call who work for the TDUs, sorry, love you, mean it. We need a new reality, or we need to acknowledge the new realities around energy efficiency, cost effectiveness. And the first of these is that on the supply side, meeting reliability is mandatory. It is something that legislators pound the table on. It's something that NERC and FERC have extensive standards about. There are penalties on it. And let us be very clear that reliability has no apparent cost limits. You must do these things if you are an ISO or an RTO or a transmission operator. And it doesn't matter how much it costs. It's difficult if your regulator gets in the way and extends the time and the cost of doing so, but you have to do it. What that says to me is if there are no costs on the supply side, we need to rethink what the limits on cost are and what the appropriate metrics are on the demand side as well, because demand is a legitimate alternative to supply for grid reliability provision. When you consider that ERCOT has already experienced a $130 billion impact electricity outage last year, and that we are already paying at least $500 million a year for ancillary services already, thanks to ERCOT's more conservative operations, we should be doing head-to-head analyses of what is the impact of spending more of those reliability dollars on demand to reduce the need for all of those expensive actions. It is not legitimate to use the idea of a marginal megawatt or megawatt hour as a comparison metric for energy efficiency when load is showing up 10,000 megawatts higher than supply capability. Clearly, we should be looking at something like, what is the cost of getting 1,000 megawatts of incremental relief, not just what is the cost of the next single megawatt hour. But similarly, because we are looking at all of the supply side stuff as an entire, we aren't even comparing them head to head. Therefore, we should be looking at energy efficiency as an entire portfolio for cost effectiveness purposes, not continuing to pretend that individual programs matter, particularly if we are already pre-selecting a limited set of energy efficiency and demand response programs that we know will solve a specific goal, which is peak reduction and ramping capability. One of the reasons the original energy efficiency program specific cost effectiveness tests were created was because in the early days when we were ramping up energy efficiency, we didn't know what all worked. And so it was relevant to say, what can we do? And every state was doing this on its own and didn't have a really big stable of experience and examples to lie on. We have all that today. We know what works. We know how to deliver energy efficiency effectively. There is no longer an excuse to say, until I know that they can deliver these savings, I need to look at it really closely. All that stuff is behind us. Let's take what we know, build on it, and evaluate an entire portfolio. And very importantly, since reliability is a public good that we are all paying for, and all of the supply side costs of improving reliability are being uplifted to every customer in Texas, we should be similarly uplifting all energy efficiency program costs to all customers in Texas with no opt-outs. Looking at you, industrial customers, no opt-outs. We should be expanding and recognizing all of the energy efficiency benefits that are considered in cost effectiveness tests to include capacity savings value. As I said, I think the bogey here is the Berkshire Hathaway proposal for $8 billion of gas turbines that will never be used until the grid shit hits some fan. Not the cost of a single avoided megawatt hour or megawatt. Energy savings should be valued in peak and stress conditions, which is quite high on the ORDC curve, moving up toward the energy price cap, not the avoided cost of a gas turbine megawatt hour during blue sky conditions. We should be looking at and quantifying, or at minimum recognizing, the value of energy efficiency and demand response as grid and reliability insurance, because they so significantly de-risk the costs and consequences of supply side failures. We should be counting transmission and distribution capital and losses avoided. We should be acknowledging, if not counting, job creation benefits, customer energy bill reductions, customer life and health benefits, and community resilience benefits, because all of those are absolute provable consequences of significant increments of energy efficiency. Next, please. These are some references. I was surprised when I did this slide that my PowerPoint decided to put them in orange rather than the usual blue. I am not a UT grad. I am not a Tennessee Titans fan. Don't know what's going on here, but these are references and links nonetheless. And it is an honor to be associated with ACEEE. It is a pleasure to speak to you all and to help contribute to all of the good work that you all have done and will do. And I am happy to, with my friend Noah and Kelly, answer some questions. What do y'all got?
Well, thank you, Allison. I appreciate that. And, you know, as I mentioned before, this is really a great opportunity, I think, to get questions from you all. If you would like to ask them in the chat, or if you'd like to raise your hand, happy to answer those questions that way. I think to start, I'll just go ahead and kick it off, Allison, if that's okay with you. Based on what we've seen from the market redesign proposal and what we've kind of heard, what are your expectations from the Public Utility Commission side of things? What do you expect them initially, at least, to be looking at in this opening up the rule change? Do you think it's going to be very simple, or do you think there should be any concern about removing limits or requirements?
I think most of the commissioners don't understand energy efficiency and demand response very well. And so I think there is a need. This is going to be harder than they think, and it's going to take longer than they think. And I have, in fact, explicitly encouraged them to do 3 things immediately. And one of them, because they've been rushing so quickly on the supply side issues, they haven't had a chance to sit back and plot through the plan for how do we do the rest of the things on the commission's plate. I think there are 3 things that they should do as a high priority immediately to set the intellectual groundwork for additional work to be done on both demand and supply side. And this is by way of prefacing, yes, they're going to open up the energy efficiency rule. Yes, they're going to work on demand response, but I don't think they understand what that means, which is why I encourage them to do the following 3 things. The first is issue an RFP immediately for an energy efficiency potential study. The second is hire somebody to use artificial intelligence and data mining tools to go through all of the several years of ERCOT smart meter data and use that as a supplement to or a contrast to what they're doing on a classic efficiency potential study, to start figuring out from the actual data the demographics of ERCOT load, including what is behind the meter in terms of resources, and find patterns of where are people actually using PV and batteries. Where do we spot smart thermostats? Where do we spot cohorts of smart thermostats as opposed to individual? Where are the signatures for resistance heating or for low income housing? I mean, we know we can spot a lot of that on a map, but the point is it would be much more effective for program delivery and for analysis of an improving future ERCOT's terrible current performance on load forecasting if we had better demographics for how it actually performs. And we could also use these data to help inform geo-targeting of future program delivery for energy efficiency and demand response. The third thing that they should be doing is a deep study of resource adequacy and operational reliability needs. And this needs to be a set of alternate portfolios combined with alternate future scenarios of all the bad stuff that could happen, and do some really interesting Monte Carlo analysis to show us what are the impacts of differing levels of energy efficiency and demand response on the reliability and cost of different supply side portfolios. Work like this that has been done in PJM and in the Pacific Northwest, every time they do this shows that the more energy efficiency and demand response you have, the more reliable and the lower cost your system reliability is, with a huge mix of different supply alternatives. That would give a lot of power and strength to our arguments about the role of energy efficiency and demand response in de-risking a supply side portfolio and lowering its cost. All of those things could be started tomorrow. I'm an optimist. They should be started soon. And what they would do is set a really valuable groundwork for opening up and developing policy forward looking on how much should we be paying for supply side stuff and what should we be focusing on in energy efficiency and demand response rules going forward.
Thank you for that. And it looks like we actually have a question from Isabella Peterson. She asks, as someone who just within the past year has followed the PUC and ERCOT, what would you say the most
Welcome aboard.
Absolutely. I'm right there with you, Isabella. She's asking, what do we think the most, one thing that she should be keeping an eye out for as these agencies enter into the sunset process later this year and into 2023?
I don't know what the current makeup of the Sunset Commission and their priorities is today relative to the innocent times when I dealt with them 20 plus years ago. But it would be my hope that the sunset process, the people who run Sunset are still committed to the good of Texas and not just to political causes. And they care about analyses for things like, are you spending the agency's efforts and money and time on things that will actually affect reliability and costs and the experience of the people of Texas, as opposed to just chasing around every political order that comes down the pike. And I think it is my hope that they will be asking, or they will be open to listening to information about, here are very promising policies that will protect all Texans that we need to, that the commission should be encouraged and to work on, and that the legislature should be encouraged to work on. It is important also to use the sunset process, not just to trash an agency, but also to acknowledge where they have done well and to acknowledge where they should not be. Don't cut off your nose to spite your face. Don't trash the PUC and create the risk that the PUC could be taken over by the Railroad Commission, for instance. So be real clear about what the PUC is doing well and what we would like them to do better. And don't spend a lot of time just dumping.
Yeah, I think I would echo those comments completely, and that sentiment and the optimism as well. I think from SPEER's perspective, and Kelly, you can jump into, I think one of the things that we're trying to do is ensure that while these processes play themselves out, that we don't lose sight of energy efficiency programming and this rulemaking, and it doesn't kind of get kicked down the road. I think that's what we are really trying to do, and that's kind of part of the reason for this webinar series, is trying to start this conversation early and keep this at the forefront of the discussion, so that once those, the resources start going towards the Sunset Commission review, that we're still in the process on working with them. And again, as Alison said, definitely making sure that we're making substantive changes that are helpful to the state and to Texans, not just ones for political reasons. And do we have any other questions?
It doesn't look like it.
If there's anyone with a utility who wants to come on and tell me where I'm wrong, or tell me your view on, I mean, I don't want to argue, but what I do want to explore is, what are the challenges you all are facing, and how can those of us who are encouraging a new rule and a new, much more stronger role and much more aggression and scale for the role of energy efficiency in Texas, and we want to drastically expand y'all's jobs and y'all's budgets to do way more for Texans and the people whom you serve. So if you work for one of the TDUs in energy efficiency and you think this is a mistake, or if you can take some time to explain what are the challenges that we need to help you overcome, please come talk to us about that. All of us are going to be at the Texas Energy Summit next week. I would love to learn more about how to help you all get much bigger programs and be even more successful at doing the things you all are doing.
Absolutely. And I know we had a couple on. I'm not sure if they were able to stay on or if they've jumped off. But again, I couldn't say it better myself, Allison. That is exactly what we wanted this to be, is a little bit more of a forum and a kickoff for the stakeholder discussions rather than, you know, a group of people coming and telling you that you're doing it wrong. This is the way it has to be. We want this to be more a relationship, more of a conversation to help kind of make Texas better, generally speaking. So yeah, I think here I'm going to go ahead and share my screen once again, just so I can show my contact information for those who would like to see it. Once I can find the right PowerPoint. So this is my contact information for those of you who want to reach out. And once again, Allison, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your thoughts. I'm confident that we'll be in contact soon. And I'm, like Alison said, please feel free to reach out if you have any comments or suggestions or want to talk about the challenges that you face and whatever organization or group you're with. And then lastly, I just want to point you all to our SPEER YouTube channel, where we have all of our previous webinars listed. We also have our upcoming events calendar on the eepartnership.org. And lastly, I just want to thank everyone for attending. I think it was a really thought-provoking discussion, Allison, and your session was a lot more exciting than mine, but I appreciate it all the same.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.